Voters in British Columbia head to the polls tomorrow, and the road to selecting the next premier, it's been a bumpy one.
We've had enough, quite frankly, of David Eby and these drugs and handing out free crack pipes. I mean, just creating these drug dens in our community.
We've heard John Rustad talk about some really far-out conspiracies this week, eating bugs, and that the COVID pandemic didn't actually happen. All kinds of bizarre things.
He's misleading once again, which is what weak leaders tend to do.
I wouldn't trust John Rustad to run my Thanksgiving dinner conversation or with the family, let alone a hospital.
We don't have a candidate that says the vaccines give you AIDS. We don't support anti-vax convoy members.
David Eby wants to talk about conspiracy theories and anything but what's actually going on because he cannot defend his government's policies.
Okay, let's bring in some reporters in British Columbia to break down what's happened in this campaign and what is still to come in this very tight race. Justine Hunter is the BC politics reporter with the Globe and Mail. Shannon Waters is the BC politics and environment reporter with the Narwhal. And Rob Shaw is a political correspondent with Check News. Welcome back to you all. The last day, our last pre-vote panel. Let's start, Justine, with you and where we think things are in this race today. What are you watching for tomorrow?
Well, we still think it's a close race, too close to call. If the NDP win a third consecutive term, it's going to be historic. The NDP don't win a lot of elections in this province, and when they do, they don't usually survive long. So three terms would be a record. A Conservative win will mean that voters want change, and I think politicians right across the country will be watching the outcome for that reason. And it will also indicate that they're perhaps not too fussy about who's driving the bus. Remember, this is like an untested party, mostly made up of rookies, led by a man who was kicked out of another party's caucus. John Rustad isn't a charismatic leader inspiring voters with his vision. His party didn't even produce a platform until this week.
Right. Okay. So we'll find out if they want to change, and we'll, throughout the course of this conversation, we'll discuss what that change may be. Shannon, where do you think this race is? Are you in the camp it's too close to call?
It is very, very close, and we've only seen the polls tighten in the last couple of days. So I would agree with Justine. I think it's just going to really come down to who is able to get their vote out. And that is going to be really key, especially because we're looking at an atmospheric river here in BC this weekend. So people who haven't yet gone to the polls might be a little bit reluctant to go out in what's looking like some ugly weather to cast their ballot. That being said, over 1 million people in this province took advantage of advanced voting to cast their ballot. For context, in the 2020 election, a total of about 1.9 million people voted all told. So we've seen record-breaking advanced turnout in the 2024 election here in BC.
Okay, I've been distracted by a bunch of things happening in Ottawa. I did not know about the atmospheric river. I once watched the Seattle Seahawks play a game in an atmospheric river, and I wouldn't go out to vote in that. So Rob, if the top-line polls show it's really tight, then it's going to come down to vote efficiency in key areas. I'm guessing the Greater Vancouver area, the Lower Mainland, the Tri-City areas. Walk me through what you're watching for as the early results come in.
Well, allow me to confirm for you the atmospheric river outside, in front and behind me. On also,
you poor man.
It is a tight election. Look, like get out the vote favors the New Democrats. They have previous contact lists. They have a huge apparatus on the ground. They're experienced. They have union support. If this is a tight race, if we're looking at this tie, you have a slight advantage to the New Democrats in getting that vote out. The Conservatives are riding a wave that we're not sure is real. It looks like it's real. Can it crest through the Fraser Valley? Can it get into the Langleys? Can it get into South Surrey? Can it go through the Tri-Cities? That's what we're watching on election night. The suburbs of Victoria, Vancouver, the power base of the NDP in the last couple of elections as they've sort of spread out. Can the Conservatives bring that back in? And Vancouver Island also is kind of, the elections in BC is kind of an afterthought most of the time, but at least half of it is in play this time. So it's going to be some battlegrounds in the center to north of Vancouver Island as well. Okay,
so Rob, just stick with you because I want to pick up on what Justine said, that John Rustad and his party only came out with a platform in the final week of the campaign. Is that a mistake? Has that had any effect? Is this a problem? Like, what do you make of them? I know things moved faster than the Conservatives were counting for the way this election unfolded, but coming out so late with it, well, what's the consequence of that? Is there one?
I don't think there is. This isn't a policy election. This is a populism election. This is a change election. Everything on the platform had come out from the Conservatives in a blitz every single day. There was 2, 3, 4 policy announcements every day. The final platform had costing numbers in it. That was the only thing new. And the costing numbers showed that the Conservatives are going to run a higher deficit than the NDP, which is kind of bizarre, and it causes some questions about how they run on a kind of the fiscal manager's perspective. But at the end of the day, the public doesn't seem to care about the numbers and the deficits here as well. So I think the Conservatives did not do any real damage to their campaign by being late with a platform.
Okay, so Shannon, the Conservatives are going to run the deficit larger than the NDP, who are already running the record deficit in the last budget, if I'm remembering the BC fiscal situation correctly. Is it really that the details in this campaign it's just been eclipsed with cost of living and change, and that's it? I mean, what do you think ultimately decides things tomorrow?
I don't think you're far off in that assessment that the sort of top line concerns in this election have been about affordability. I'd add public safety in there. That's something that's been talked about a lot by the leaders on the campaign trail. If you're someone who is really interested in what political reporters talk about as fiscal management, particularly prudent fiscal management, I don't know who you pick between the BC NDP and the BC Conservatives. You have the BC NDP's track record to go over. They've been in government for 7 years. And then you have the Conservatives coming out with a platform that shows a higher deficit than what the NDP is initially planning to spend, and not a lot of details on how they eventually plan to get it back to balance if they win a second term. So I would say that a lot of people, I think, had made up their minds, as we saw in advanced voting, and then just a few folks out there who either didn't have time to go to the advanced polls or are sitting on the fence and just haven't been able to pick their party yet. I'm very curious to see the results on election night.
So Justine, in past elections, we see a big number of the advanced polls. We think, whoa, change. But as we were just talking about in my New Brunswick segment earlier, people are just doing that more and more, and the parties like to put their diehard votes in the advanced polls so they can focus on everyone else afterwards. So what conclusions do you draw from the million in the advance? And just touch a little bit on Sonia Furstenau and the Green Party and where they are in this very polarized election between Evie and Rustad.
Yeah, I think the 1 million voters at the advanced polls is really a function of how Elections BC has reformed the system and made it easier for people to get out to vote. So it's promising what they say will be the most accessible election in Canada. And so what they did was they made it really easy to wander into a polling station from wherever you were and slip in your ballot. So I don't think that's going to reflect in a great turnout tomorrow. I think we'll be lucky if we get back up to kind of average statistics, which is about 60% turnout of registered voters. And the Greens, I think, will be, what they're hoping for is that this race will be so close that there won't be a clear winner tomorrow night. So the message that they've been playing, and in alliance with all these independents that are running, is this idea that if there is a minority government, then you'll have these sort of checks and balances that come with having a third party or some independents that can kind of mitigate some of the extremes of the polarized parties that we have right now. Because what we've got right now are kind of the starkest, most extreme sort of split between the two parties. And if you want something that maybe waters some of those things down, they say they're the option. But they are, if you look at the public opinion polls, they're at best maybe 10% of the popular vote, and not a lot of efficiency in terms of their vote. So they might come out of there with holding their 2 seats. So it really will depend on whether one of these two major parties has kind of actually managed to pull ahead in the final hours of this campaign.
Okay, so if this is as tight as everybody here believes, and you're the experts from British Columbia, so I believe all of you, individual races and individual candidates are really going to matter. And Shannon, we've seen some doozy candidates in this election. We've talked about the independents, and we know the Greens are going to be a factor in this, but we've seen one candidate for the Conservatives talk about a COVID vaccine would give you AIDS. But now Brent Chapman has become a starring figure in the final role of this campaign. He's running for the Conservatives. Old social media posts have resurfaced where he refers to Palestinians as inbred, questions mass shootings like Sandy Hook, Quebec City Mosque. And there was this remarkable video I saw where Global News went to his campaign headquarters and he was like hiding in a room. And what is the effect of these sorts of candidate eruptions on the Conservative campaign down the stretch?
Probably not as intense as the NDP had been hoping for. Brent Chapman has, as you outlined, had some very controversial and offensive comments out there on the public record. Whether the Conservatives were aware of all of them before they made him a candidate isn't entirely clear. It certainly seems likely they knew about some of them. And Rustad has stood behind him, and he hasn't ruled out putting Chapman in cabinet if the Conservatives form government. So, he's basically said, look, Chapman has apologized. He's apologized to those of our candidates who are members of the Muslim community and who are Palestinians. He's apologized to me, and if his apology is good enough for us, it's good enough for voters, and they are going to get the chance to decide. Now, the tactic of hiding from media is also one that the party has deployed on a much broader scale. We've seen the Conservatives bailing on local debates last minute, as well as turning down invitations. They're not the only ones to do that. There have been incidences where Green candidates and NDP candidates have not shown up. But the Conservatives are the ones who, it seems, have done this most often in favor of, they have told the debate organizers, door knocking, going out and talking to voters directly. They are gambling on the idea that that is the better way to mobilize their vote. And we'll soon see if that's going to pay off.
Okay, David Eby and John Rustad were both asked about Brent Chapman and some of the controversy. I want to play his clip and get your reactions on the other side. Have a listen to this.
It's deeply and profoundly disturbing to actually know that a grown adult in British Columbia who is running for public office would promote these hateful views online, would publish them and try to influence people's opinions against children, against Muslims.
Well, there's no question that the statement that he made, those comments from 10 years ago, I found offensive, and I know many other people do. People sometimes make mistakes. However, I think what is important is actions. And so we'll see. Brent has already reached out, like I say, to the candidates, to the people on our team, and apologized. They have accepted that apology, as I have accepted that apology.
Okay, Rob, I wonder, what do you make of that? And also, like, Brent Chapman comes from a political family, right? Like, his wife is in politics, so he would know posting these things may come back to haunt him. What do you make of this whole thing?
Yeah, his wife is Surrey MP Carrie Lynn Findlay, so you would think that he would know better. But look, like, he is very likely to become an MLA tomorrow night. He's very likely to win that riding. And the Conservatives, despite all of these controversies, are very likely to come close to winning the election tomorrow. And I put the question to David Eby this week. I said, if the Conservatives are a bunch of racist, homophobic, crazy, outlandish, wacko people, how is it that half of this province is still considering making them the government tomorrow? What does that say about your campaign, your inability to read the public mood, and where we are at right now? And I think that's a question New Democrats are wrestling with. They didn't offer very much in this election other than the other guys are worse than us. You might be mad at us, but they are worse. And I think that message only went so far and kind of got tired and diluted a little bit throughout the campaign. There are things that the Conservatives said that in any other election would immediately implode a party and disqualify their candidates, and they've just powered right on through. And so the dynamic's different. The results tomorrow will be fascinating, and it is a very untraditional election.
I'm not comparing them to Donald Trump, but Donald Trump has changed the laws of political gravity everywhere. And people just don't get fired and dropped for things that, when I had hair, ends your political career. So Justine, to the question Rob put to David Eby, I mean, what does this say about David Eby, about his understanding of the mood, and about the campaign offer he has put on the table to British Columbians, if, despite the Oppo research they have dumped on candidate after candidate, it's still a nail-biter going into Saturday?
Yeah, I do think that the message that the NDP are putting out, I mean, they have emptied the stalls out with a huge pile of muck that's been generated by both Mr. Rustad and his candidates. Remember, Mr. Rustad is the one that suggested that climate change activists want your children to eat bugs. So there's lots of material there. And is it landing and swaying undecided voters? Probably not. But I think what they're really doing is trying to make sure that their base gets out. This is the kind of rhetoric that might motivate New Democrats to get off their butts and get down to the polling station. And I think that's the kind of stuff where when we see the breakdown of who voted and when, whether a lot of this stuff came out before people went to the polls, I think the NDP have made sure there was like a steady diet of this stuff in the campaign to kind of sync that at least with their own supporters.
Yeah, Shannon, every time I looked at any kind of a social media site on the British Columbia election, I saw something else coming out about, another candidate here. But what does it tell you that the NDP clearly had ammunition, but they may be in trouble tomorrow? What does that tell us about how effective a campaign David Eby and his team has run relative to the mood of British Columbia?
I would agree that it hasn't been a particularly inspiring campaign from the NDP for voters who might be sort of inclined their way, but not necessarily dyed in the wool. I think the other thing that has been at play here is that the Conservative Party has been built out of the kind of people who were making the comments that their candidates have made, that their leader has made. John Rustad has spent a couple of years building support among people who supported the convoy that occupied Ottawa, who oppose public health mandates, who have some pretty out there concerns about things like public health or globalism. And so I don't think that the attacks that the NDP have been able to launch and all of this material that they've been able to put into the public sphere has necessarily mattered for people who are attracted to the Conservative Party or those who were really sort of repelled by the NDP. I mean, I go back to 2020 and I think about the fact that the BC Liberal Party dropped a candidate with 10 days to go in the campaign because he inferred that birth control was similar to eugenics. And the Liberals eventually dropped him, couldn't replace him, couldn't put anybody else in the riding. That kind of comment likely wouldn't even really register in terms of news coverage in this year's election.
No, yeah, that's what I mean.
And that is mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's all changed post-2016 in this weird kind of way. 2016 in the United States, and later here. So look, Rob, we got about 90 seconds left. You can see where that sort of hardcore right-wing kind of conservative vote is going to go. David Eby will hold on, presumably, to sort of that base of the NDP. The BC United Old Liberal Party orphans, the people who might actually vote for Justin Trudeau in the last, where do they go in this? Because they're going to really matter in that suburban ring around Vancouver. What's your sense?
Well, I do think the sum total of all the controversies that we've been talking about is, for a lot of those voters, a sniff test that they just can't bring themselves to vote Conservative. And so they may end up without, any other option with the NDP. And the post-election discussion is going to be, with probably a very large Conservative opposition or maybe even government, is there a center-right party that can emerge in British Columbia? And if so, who champions it? Where does it land? How does it carve out space for himself? Or is that era over in this province for the next couple of elections? You hear the frustration that there's not another option in this election, but there's not a lot of space in the polarization right now to make that option viable.
Yeah, just look next door in Alberta. Are you headed towards that kind of a polarized sort of political climate? Who knows, right? There's a realignment happening, and we'll find out tomorrow night. I've enjoyed talking to the three of you so much during this campaign. It's a fascinating election, and I can't wait to see what's going to happen tomorrow night. Justine Hunter with The Globe, Rob Shawachek News, and Shannon Waters with The Narwhal. Thank you for educating us on BC politics, and have fun tomorrow.